We were sitting at this restaurant, the one she loves, all candlelight and soft music, where we were supposed to celebrate our 10th anniversary. I'd been planning this evening for weeks. She'd been acting strange, but I was too busy brushing it off as stress or work. I thought maybe tonight would fix things, rekindle whatever had drifted off course between us. But halfway through the appetizers, I noticed she wasn't looking at me. No, her attention was focused somewhere behind my shoulder. A flicker of something, was it recognition? Passed over her face, and she quickly looked back at me, smiling in this forced, almost rehearsed way. I felt a tightness creep into my stomach, but I swallowed it down. I was probably overreacting. When we finally got to the main course, I excused myself to use the restroom, and on my way back, I noticed her. She was leaning slightly toward the man at the next table, her face animated, her laugh loud enough to make a few people turn and look. She didn't laugh like that with me anymore. I stopped dead, just out of her line of sight, and watched as she reached out, playfully brushing her fingers along the man's arm. The guy leaned in closer, and her body language practically dripped with an ease and warmth that I hadn't felt from her in months. The scene felt absurd, surreal even, like I'd accidentally walked into someone else's twisted love story. She wouldn't do this here, I thought, not tonight, not with me just a few steps away. But there it was. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to believe what I was seeing. A low buzz of humiliation started pounding through my head, and my hands tightened around the small envelope in my pocket. That envelope held everything I'd wanted to tell her tonight. Words I'd scribbled down after long days, late nights. Moments when I still believed she was mine. Words that felt foolish now, dripping with the hope that she still cared, that I was still the one. And here she was, with this stranger, leaning in close, her eyes practically sparkling. The man whispered something, and she threw her head back and laughed. Something inside me snapped. I felt this cold, rigid clarity, and before I could think twice, I was moving forward, past the table where they sat, my footsteps loud enough for her to turn and look up in shock. Without a word, I pulled the anniversary letter from my pocket and handed it to her. She froze, and for a split second, her expression shifted. There was guilt, but only for a moment, replaced almost instantly by something cold and unreadable. "I was going to read this to you," I said, voice steady but icy. "But I think it speaks for itself." Then, without waiting for her reaction, I turned on my heel and walked away, not bothering to look back. Walking away was supposed to feel powerful, like I was taking control, like I'd caught her red-handed and left her with no choice but to sit there, stunned. But as I stepped outside into the cold air, the adrenaline started to wear off. My mind kept replaying those little gestures, that ridiculous, loud laugh she gave him, the way she leaned in, comfortable, intimate. And then it hit me. This wasn't some passing flirtation. She knew this guy. I'd barely made it 10 steps from the restaurant when I heard her heels clacking on the pavement behind me. "Wait!" she called out, her voice tense, breathless. I stopped, partly because I was furious, partly because I needed to hear her explanation, and partly because I didn't know what the hell else to do. She finally reached me, her face flushed. "Can we talk?" she asked, arms crossed, her eyes scanning my face as if trying to gauge how much I knew. "Talk," I repeated, and I could hear the sarcasm in my own voice. "Sure, Sarah. Why don't you start by explaining what I just saw in there?" She hesitated, glancing around as if suddenly aware of how exposed we were on the street, then lowered her voice. "It's not what you think." It was such a cliché line that I almost laughed. "Then tell me what it is." I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. Her face twisted, and I thought for a second I saw something close to remorse flash in her eyes, but it was gone in an instant. She straightened up and gave me this guarded, almost defiant look. "Fine. He's just an old friend, okay? I ran into him recently, and we were catching up." She rolled her eyes, as if the whole situation was ridiculous, as if I was the one overreacting. "An old friend," I repeated, letting each word hang in the air. "And you just decided to reconnect with him? Like this? On our anniversary?" She flinched, a tiny movement, but I saw it. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, irritation creeping into her tone. "I didn't plan to see him here. He was just there." I shook my head, hardly able to believe what I was hearing. She was standing there, giving me this half-baked story, not even trying to hide the lie. It was like she didn't care enough to put in the effort, didn't care if I believed her or not. And that hurt more than anything else. Oh, okay. So it was just a coincidence that you looked happier in those 2 minutes with him than you've looked with me in months? That's all in my head, right? She opened her mouth to argue but stopped, her gaze dropping to the ground. I thought maybe she was finally going to come clean. But then she looked back up at me, her expression hardening, and shook her head. Believe what you want, she said, her voice cool. You're making a scene over nothing. It was like a slap in the face. Nothing. She'd reduced everything. The betrayal, the lies, the way she'd ignored me for months. To nothing. Her words hit like a cold wave. You're making a scene over nothing. She didn't apologize. Didn't even try to ease the anger she could clearly see building in me. Instead, she brushed it off, as if I were just a nuisance, an obstacle in her way. I stood there, gripping the letter still crumpled in my hand, feeling every bit of that humiliation turning into something sharper, darker. Nothing, I repeated, voice dropping lower. I could barely get the words out, my throat tight with a mixture of anger and something that felt too much like heartbreak. Sarah, are you listening to yourself? I just watched you flirt with some guy on our anniversary, and your only response is to call it nothing? She sighed, her patience visibly thinning. Look, I don't know what you want me to say. Yes, I was talking to someone. Yes, maybe I was friendly. Her tone had that casual edge to it that was driving me insane. But it's not like I'm doing anything wrong. I stared at her, trying to understand how someone I'd known for so long could feel so alien to me in this moment. She didn't look like the woman I married. There was something almost cold in her gaze, an indifference I'd never seen before. It was like she'd already made up her mind, already decided how this was going to go, and I was just extra noise in her world. Friendly, I echoed, trying to keep my voice steady. So that's what you call it? Friendly. Sarah, you laughed at his jokes like I wasn't even in the room. You touched his arm like he was someone special to you. I could feel the anger boiling over, years of trust and loyalty shattering in my mind. Do you think I'm an idiot? You're not even trying to deny it. She rolled her eyes again, a flash of something condescending in her face that sent a chill down my spine. I don't know why you're acting like this, she muttered. You're making a huge deal over something harmless. I can have friends, you know? Friends, I said, laughing bitterly, unable to contain the frustration anymore. You know, Sarah, I'd buy that excuse if you hadn't been working late for weeks, or if you hadn't started locking your phone out of nowhere. Friends, don't insult me. Just tell me the truth. Her face tightened, and she took a slow, deliberate breath, crossing her arms like she was readying herself for a battle she'd already accepted. But then, there it was, a flicker of something in her eyes, just for a moment, something that looked suspiciously like guilt. It was small, so small that if I hadn't been watching her so closely, I might have missed it. But I didn't. That flicker said everything. I leaned in closer, my voice barely above a whisper now. Who is he? She hesitated, eyes darting away, and for a moment, I thought she'd actually tell me. But instead, she forced a shrug and said in a tone so detached it felt like another slap. Just someone from work. Not that it's any of your business. And there it was. She slipped. She hadn't said he was some random guy she'd bumped into at the restaurant. She'd admitted it. Someone from work. That slip-up hung between us, sharp as glass. I could see the realization flash in her eyes. She knew she'd given away more than she'd intended. But instead of backtracking or apologizing, she just stared at me. Her jaw clenched, as if challenging me to do something about it. Someone from work? I repeated slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. So it wasn't some random old friend you ran into tonight. You've known him. You've planned this. For the first time, a crack appeared in her icy demeanor. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to the side, then back to me, as if weighing her options. And that silence, that was the real answer. I felt it like a punch to the gut. I'd been naive, thinking maybe she'd own up, maybe even explain herself. But all I got was more silence. More lies. Why? I asked finally, my voice coming out hoarse. What could he possibly give you that I don't? Or do you just enjoy sneaking around and lying to my face? She scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. What are you even talking about? She snapped, her tone taking on this venomous edge. Not everything is about you, you know? Just because we've been together forever doesn't mean I don't deserve a life outside of you. The words hit hard, and something in me shifted. I wasn't standing in front of the person I thought I knew anymore. I was staring at a stranger, one who had no problem twisting the knife deeper. A part of me wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see what she was doing. But something told me that she saw it perfectly well and simply didn't care. I trusted you, Sarah, I said, my voice breaking slightly despite myself. I thought we were in this together. But you don't even seem sorry. You seem annoyed, like I'm inconveniencing you by caring. She rolled her eyes, exhaling sharply. Look, I didn't want you to find out this way, okay? I didn't want some dramatic scene in the middle of a restaurant. You're the one blowing this up right now. So there is something to blow up? I challenged, stepping closer, searching her face for any trace of regret. Anything that might suggest she felt a fraction of the pain she just dropped on me. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow of hesitation. A glimpse of the woman I remembered, the woman I'd loved. But she shook her head, and whatever softness had been there was gone. You were going to find out sooner or later, she said finally, her tone detached, as if this was a fact she'd accepted long ago. Things haven't been good between us for a while. You know that as well as I do. The casual dismissal of our entire relationship, the ease with which she brushed it off, left me momentarily speechless. Things haven't been good? The line repeated over and over in my mind, gnawing at the last bits of sanity I had left. I had tried. I had put effort into this relationship, sacrificed for it. And now, in her eyes, it was just something to be swept aside. A small detail she was apparently prepared to discard. So that's it then? I whispered, almost to myself. You're just done. She shrugged, that same cold indifference back on her face. Maybe it's better this way. I didn't want to hurt you, but things change. People change. And right then, in that moment, I realized she had already moved on, long before tonight. Her words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like smoke. Things change. People change. She said it like it was the easiest thing in the world, like she'd just grown out of me, out of us. I felt myself reeling, caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. How could she stand there, so calm, as if our years together meant nothing? Tell me something, Sarah, I said slowly, watching her eyes. How long has this been going on? Since you're so comfortable with all of this, I'm guessing it didn't start yesterday. She hesitated, a flicker of something in her expression, something that looked almost like fear. But then she shook her head and threw up a flimsy wall of defiance. It's not. It's complicated, okay? It's not something you'd understand. I laughed bitterly, the sound surprising even me. Complicated? You mean complicated like lying to me for weeks? Or complicated like hiding a whole other relationship behind my back while you smile to my face? She glared at me, that defensive posture coming back, but her eyes were shifting, darting around, like she was scrambling for an excuse. It's not what you think, she said, her voice tight. We just connected. It was a friendship that turned into something else. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you. I cut her off, unable to take another word. You care about me? I repeated, my voice rising. This is how you show it? By sneaking around, meeting him in restaurants, lying to my face about who he is? Do you even hear yourself? She opened her mouth, ready to spit out some new excuse, but stopped short, her gaze slipping to the side. It was almost like she was calculating what she should say next. And then, there it was, her tone suddenly softer, like she was trying to play at sincerity. Look, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just happened. I don't know why I'm explaining this to you. I just need you to understand that this wasn't about hurting you. It was something I needed. I took a step back, the words hitting me like a punch. Something you needed? I repeated, feeling the weight of them sink in. So you needed him more than you needed us? More than you needed honesty. Her mouth opened and closed, her eyes narrowing in frustration, as she struggled to come up with something that would paint her as the victim. "You just don't get it?" she finally spat, her voice rising in frustration. "It's not like I planned any of this. Things haven't been right between us for a long time, and I wanted to feel like myself again. That was it. That was the excuse, the justification she'd been clinging to, and it was so empty, so utterly hollow that I felt my stomach turn. She wanted to feel like herself, and that justified this? All of a sudden, the dinners missed, the late nights at work, the glances at her phone she'd hidden from me. They all fit into place. "Let me get this straight," I said, every word dripping with the cold rage I could barely contain. "You wanted to find yourself. So instead of talking to me, instead of working on us, you ran off to him?" Her face hardened, and any pretense of apology, of guilt, evaporated in an instant. "I don't have to justify myself to you," she snapped. "If you hadn't been so caught up in your own world, maybe things wouldn't have come to this." I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't a confession. It was an attack. She was twisting it all around, putting the blame on me, as if I'd driven her to it, as if I were the reason she had no choice but to betray me. It was like she'd rehearsed it, crafted the perfect excuse that would let her walk away. Guilt-free, her words sank in, each one twisting deeper, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. This was more than just betrayal. It was some twisted version of blame shifting, like I had somehow set the stage for her to cheat, like my life, my trust, had made it easy for her to cross lines I never imagined she'd touch. "Caught up in my own world?" I said, barely recognizing the hardness in my own voice. "Sarah, I was the one showing up every day, thinking we were building something. While I was out there working, planning a future for us, you were off meeting him, weren't you?" Her expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked more defiant. "You don't understand," she muttered, shaking her head. "You think you're the perfect husband, but you barely even see me anymore. All you do is work or worry about the next big goal. When was the last time you even asked me how I was feeling?" My jaw clenched as her words rolled over me, trying to cast her affair as some kind of response to my own supposed shortcomings. I tried to focus, to keep a grip on reality, but it felt like she was twisting my own mind, making me question every sacrifice, every moment of loyalty I'd put into this marriage. "I was doing all of that for us," I shot back, feeling the heat rising in my voice. "You're acting like I abandoned you, like I wasn't there every night, every weekend, doing everything I could to make you happy. I gave everything, Sarah. I trusted you. But you wanted more, didn't you? You wanted someone new, someone who didn't know you the way I do." Her eyes flashed with something, anger, guilt. I couldn't even tell anymore. "I just wanted something that wasn't predictable, okay? Everything with you had become so routine, so lifeless. I needed to feel like I mattered, like I was worth something." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet night. "So, instead of talking to me, you went and found someone else to make you feel worth something? That's it? That's your justification?" She scoffed, crossing her arms and looking away. "If you want to make me the villain here, go ahead. I don't care. You're so obsessed with being right, with being the one who's been hurt, but you have no idea what it was like for me. You don't even see what I've been going through." I felt my heart pound in my chest, the edges of my vision going dark as every lie, every twisted excuse started to blur together. "Then help me see, Sarah," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "Show me exactly how this all started. Tell me how far it's gone. Or can you even do that?" Her face went pale for a split second, a tiny flicker, but enough for me to see the truth she'd been holding back. She shifted, visibly uncomfortable, and for the first time, I saw her defenses waver. I didn't know if I wanted the truth, but I needed it. She looked down, her shoulders tense, and let out a shaky breath. "We started meeting up a few months ago. At first it was just talking, grabbing lunch here and there, but it became more. I didn't expect it to, but..." Her voice trailed off, her gaze still firmly on the ground. "And then," I pressed, feeling my heart sink with each word. She finally met my eyes, and I saw the walls she'd built around herself falter. It went further, more than once. The admission hung in the air, heavy and final. The pieces fell together, The late nights, the distance, the way she'd brushed me off every time I tried to get close to her. All of it made sense now, painted in colors I'd been too blind, too trusting to see. "Thank you," I said, voice hollow, "for finally telling the truth. It just took 10 years and a stranger across the table to get it out of you." Her confession left a hollow ache in my chest, a void where trust used to be. I wanted to scream, to make her understand the magnitude of what she'd destroyed. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed, my mind racing through 1,000 memories that now felt stained by her betrayal. "You finally admit it," I said slowly, each word heavy. "Months of lying, of coming home to me with him still on your mind. Do you even feel guilty, Sarah? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" Her face shifted, a flash of something unreadable. For a second, I thought she might finally crack, might finally drop the last layer of her defenses. But instead, she shrugged, crossing her arms again. "You're not being fair. This wasn't all my fault. If you'd just been more present, maybe I wouldn't have needed him." Needed him. The phrase echoed in my mind, the way she said it without a hint of shame or regret. She didn't see this as a mistake. She saw it as a justified reaction to, what, boredom? Routine? The life we had built together? "So, that's it then?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're standing here, blaming me, saying this whole thing is my fault because you needed some excitement? You needed someone else to make you feel alive." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, her gaze faltered. "I didn't say it was all your fault," she said, voice softer now, almost pleading. "But you have to admit things between us have been flat. And maybe I went looking for something outside of us. But I'm not the only one to blame for why we're here." I shook my head, the weight of her words sinking in. "So you went out and had an affair to fix things? And you didn't think to tell me, to give us a chance to work through it together?" She laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Work through what, exactly? You were always so focused on everything else, too busy for real conversations or... Don't you dare make this about me." I cut her off, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. I wasn't the one sneaking around, lying to my spouse. I wasn't the one making excuses to avoid dealing with our problems. You made that choice, Sarah. You. She rolled her eyes, looking away, and for the first time, I realized that she didn't just feel justified. She didn't feel anything. No remorse, no sorrow, just this cold detachment, like our marriage had been nothing more than a chapter she'd already closed. "Maybe this was inevitable," she said, her tone casual, almost resigned. "Maybe we both just outgrew each other." The words hit harder than I expected, like she'd written off everything we'd shared as a phase she was relieved to be done with. "Outgrew each other?" I echoed, unable to keep the hurt out of my voice. "Is that how you see it? That's the story you'll tell yourself when you look back on this?" She shrugged, her eyes drifting away, as if she'd already moved on in her mind. "I don't know what else to say. I didn't plan for it to end like this, but here we are." The finality in her tone gutted me. I could feel the walls of my world, the world I'd built around us, crumbling, slipping away piece by piece. She had no intention of trying to fix this, no desire to even look back. In that moment, I understood. Sarah wasn't just ending our marriage. She was erasing it, rewriting it in her mind as something temporary, disposable. "Fine," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. "If that's how little it meant to you, then maybe you're right. Maybe we were over a long time ago, and I was just too blind to see it." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. But there was no softness, no trace of the woman I thought I knew. She'd made her choice. She'd moved on. And I was just a part of her past she was ready to leave behind. I could feel it all. The years, the memories, every moment we'd built together, turning to ashes between us, slipping through my fingers as I looked at her. Sarah wasn't going to fight for us. She wasn't going to say she'd made a mistake, or beg for forgiveness, or even try to find some piece of what we'd once had. She stood there, hollow-eyed, like she was already gone, and I realized with a crushing finality that maybe she had been gone for a long time. A strange calm settled over me, cutting through the anger and betrayal like a cold blade. If she was so ready to move on, If she could turn her back on everything we'd shared without so much as a flicker of regret, then I wouldn't be the one clinging to the ruins. I wouldn't let her see how deeply she'd hurt me. I took a step back, straightening up, squaring my shoulders, meeting her empty gaze. "You know what?" I said quietly, each word sharp and clear. "You're right. Maybe we did outgrow each other. But don't try to make this about us, Sarah. This was you. You made this choice. You took the trust one gave you and threw it away. That's on you." Her face shifted, a flicker of annoyance passing through her eyes. She crossed her arms, clearly irritated that I wasn't giving her the last word, that I wasn't collapsing in front of her. "I'm not going to stand here and be lectured," she muttered, looking away. "You act like you're perfect, like you didn't contribute to any of this. I've had to live in your shadow for years while you were off playing the good husband, doing everything you thought I wanted. But you never asked what I wanted, did you?" Her words cut deep, but there was something about the way she said them, like a rehearsed line, a justification she'd built up to soothe her own conscience. And as I stood there, watching her try to convince herself she was right, I felt a strange kind of clarity. "Maybe you're right," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Maybe I didn't ask you enough questions. Maybe I didn't know what you wanted. But that's because you stopped talking to me. You didn't give us a chance, Sarah. You decided it was easier to throw it all away than to face it." She looked at me, her face a mixture of anger and something else, something vulnerable she couldn't quite hide. But just as quickly as it appeared, she masked it, looking down with a shrug. "Well, I guess we both know where we stand now, don't we?" she said, her tone flat, final. I looked at her one last time, really looked at her, and it hit me how much of a stranger she'd become. The warmth, the spark, the loyalty I'd believed in for years. All of it was gone. I wasn't looking at the woman I'd loved. I was looking at the person who had chosen to break us, and there was no going back. Without another word, I turned and walked away. The cold air bit into me, but I welcomed it, feeling it clear my head, numb the ache in my chest as I walked away from her. Each step felt like leaving pieces of myself behind. The street was quiet, the world around me muted, as if everything was holding its breath, watching me let go of everything I'd thought was unbreakable. I didn't look back, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing any more of my pain. But the truth was, I felt empty, stripped down to nothing, like my whole life had been hollowed out. I walked without aim, letting the streets pull me wherever they wanted, my mind racing over every detail, every tiny clue I'd missed, all the small cracks that had somehow become a canyon. The signs had been there, I could see that now. Her late nights, the subtle withdrawal, the phone she kept so close it might as well have been glued to her. But I'd ignored them, told myself I was imagining things. She'd been my wife, my partner, my everything. I'd never once thought I needed to look over my shoulder. Eventually, I found myself at a small, quiet park where we used to come sometimes, back when things were simple. I sat down on a bench, feeling the cold metal beneath me, the weight of everything settling in. A few months ago, I might have called her, asked her to meet me here. We'd have laughed, talked, maybe even planned our future, imagining growing old together. Now, it felt like that life belonged to someone else, someone who'd been too naive to know what betrayal really looked like. As I sat there, memories flooded back unbidden, relentless, each one cutting deeper than the last. I thought about the night we got engaged, how she'd looked at me with those bright eyes, full of promises and dreams. I thought about the way she used to laugh, how she'd curl up next to me on lazy Sunday mornings, how we'd talk about nothing and everything. It all felt like a lie now, a carefully constructed facade that had shattered with one night, one confession. And then came the anger, a fierce, consuming wave that seared through the numbness. I'd given her everything. I trusted her with every piece of myself, sacrificed without a second thought, believing we were building something solid, something real. And for what? So she could turn around and tell me I'd somehow pushed her to this? I clenched my fists, feeling my nails bite into my palms, grounding myself in that pain. I could feel the humiliation twisting in my gut, the shame that came from being blindsided, from trusting too fully. But I refused to let her words twist my own memories, to let her take those years and rewrite them into something disposable. I would hold onto the good we'd shared, even if she'd chosen to erase it all. Hours must have passed as I sat there, staring at the stars through bare branches, piecing together the fragments of what I just lost. By the time I finally stood up, my mind was made up. There would be no more chasing her, no more excuses, no more hoping she'd come back and realize her mistake. She had made her choice, and now so would I. I walked back home that night with a calm resolve, my heart still raw but determined. When I finally got home, the house felt strange, unfamiliar, like I was stepping into someone else's life. Shadows stretched across the walls, the silence pressing in, amplifying the hollow ache in my chest. Everything in that house was a reminder of her, of us, of the life we'd built and the trust she'd so easily shattered. It was like our memories lingered in every corner, watching me, mocking me. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the framed pictures lining the hallway, our smiles frozen in time, eyes bright with promises that now felt empty. Each picture told a story: a trip to the mountains, lazy summer days by the lake, holidays with family. We'd filled this house with memories, with laughter and plans for the future. And now it was nothing more than a gallery of a life I'd never get back. I made my way to the living room, sitting down heavily on the couch, my mind racing. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of it made my stomach churn. I could let her keep haunting this place, let her betrayal turn every corner into a bitter reminder. Or I could take control, start to rebuild from the ground up, even if I was doing it alone. Slowly, I got up and walked over to our wedding photo, the one she'd insisted we hang up right above the fireplace. I stared at it, taking in the way we looked at each other, the way she'd held my hand as if she'd never let go. I could almost hear her laughter, see the way she'd promised forever with those bright eyes. But that version of her was gone, and holding on to that picture wasn't going to bring her back. Without another thought, I took it down and placed it face down on the table. One by one, I went through the house, gathering the little mementos, the keepsakes I'd once treasured. A part of me felt numb, hollow, as I stripped the place bare of any trace of her, but another part, a quieter, stronger part, felt relief, like I was finally letting myself breathe. When I'd finished, I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the scattered remnants of a marriage that no longer existed. My mind flashed back to her words, her excuses, the way she'd looked at me without a trace of remorse. I thought I'd feel rage, maybe even regret, but instead, there was a strange sense of peace, a calm acceptance settling over me. This was the end, and maybe that was okay. I reached for my phone and opened a new email draft, typing out a single line to my lawyer. I'm ready to move forward with the divorce. Let me know what I need to do. I hit send, exhaling deeply. The next morning felt different. For the first time, I woke up without that heavy knot of confusion and betrayal twisting in my gut. There was a stillness in the air, a sense of finality I hadn't felt before. The decision had been made. Now I just had to figure out what came next. I spent the day clearing out more of the house, boxing up the last remnants of our life together. Her clothes, her books, the things she'd left scattered around without a second thought. All of it went into boxes that I'd leave by the door. Every item I packed felt like I was reclaiming another inch of my life, setting boundaries where none had been before. This house, this space was mine now, and I was ready to make it feel that way. As I worked, I realized that, for the first time in months, I was looking forward. No more what-ifs, no more clinging to what I thought we had. The silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt open, like a canvas waiting for something new. She'd stripped so much away, but now I had the chance to build something on my own terms. There was power in that, quiet but steady. Late in the evening, I took one last box and drove to a small clearing outside of town. I set it down, lit a match, and watched as the flames licked at the edges, curling around the photos, the letters, the remnants of the life we'd shared. The fire crackled and danced, casting a warm glow that felt almost cleansing, as though it were burning away the past, reducing it to embers and smoke. I stayed there, watching until nothing was left but a pile of ashes. As I drove back home, I felt the weight finally lift. It was over, and I had survived. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be days when the memories would resurface, raw and painful. But I also knew I was free. Free to rediscover who I was, to figure out what I wanted my life to look like without her shadow over it. When I stepped back into the house, it felt lighter, different, like it had finally become mine. I sat down, breathing in the silence, and let myself imagine a new future, one that was mine alone.